So we're back on that rough road again, aren't we? Another major, fiercely competitive Nigerian election that could once again become mired in controversy, systemic failure, and extremely worrying protocols. Hopefully not, but we'll have to wait and see. Meanwhile, tight security is being imposed in 28 of Nigeria's 36 states, where elections for governors and state assemblies take place on Saturday. The Inspector General of Police, Usman Baba, has announced a ban on vehicle traffic between midnight on Friday until the end of voting at 6 p.m. on Saturday. Some clashes between rival parties have been reported in Lagos State, battles that have been drawn along ethnic lines. There are also other hotspots and flashpoints for election violence across Nigeria. Add to this the possibility of another mismanaged ballot after INEC's awful example of February the 25th, and the question becomes, what will this weekend serve up? Will it be a glorious finale with INEC becoming a cathedral of hope, or will it be another disgraceful outing of delays, defeat by technology, disenfranchisement, and allegations of power seized by intimidation? Perspective on all this, as well as an assessment of the security issues and arrangements for Saturday's election, I'm joined now in the studio by the Professor of Communications and Deputy Dean of the Postgraduate School at Bayes University in Abuja, Professor Abiodun Adeniyi, by the journalist, political affairs commentator, and Arise News analyst, Dr. Constance Ikokwu. And from our off-site studios, we're also joined by the international security analyst and African representative for the Anti-Terrorism Accreditation Board, David Otto. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Let me come to you first, Prof. So the governorship and state assembly elections coming up this weekend on Saturday, and these elections are significant for INEC and for many voters as a test of where things stand. Give us your sense of what that election represents from your observation perch.
Well, it's another opportunity for us to see another installment of the festival that we're celebrating, which is the Festival of Democracy. And of course, it's another opportunity again for INEC to remedy some of the errors that it made in the presidential election. We expect to see some improvement in terms of, alleged disenfranchisement, in terms of failure of technology, and in terms of, delay in the arrival of its officials, to the polling booths. And of course, in terms of the use of technology, the last time there was a problem with the instantaneous rendition of results, from the polling booth onto IREV. We expect that this time around, it's not going to be the case, realizing that, yes, we had tension, we had anxiety in the presidential election. A lot more of these will also be registered, with the governorship and state house of assembly election, against the background of the fact that it's a subnational election, which is largely closer to the people, and of course, we expect some more tension and compression. But importantly, it's also important to make the point that we also expect, higher level of performance from the security agencies. With the presidential election, they had to deal with 36 states, and Abuja, obviously 37. But this time around, just in 28 states. So we could say that if they were stretched with the presidential election, we do not expect them to be stretched with this version of the election. And finally, Charles, we are very hopeful that the election will not be crisis reading, such that in the post-election stage, we're not going to have states dropping into the off-season, off-cycle election tradition. We have one dropping into that circle in 2019 with Imo State. We hope that this one will be top-notch, will be largely free, fair, and credible, such that post-election crisis will not be too turbulent, where we are going to have judiciary intervening and making elections, making people in offices rather legal but not legitimate, like we saw largely, relatively, arguably, and in Imo. We do expect that this time around, 28 states will come out with 28 statutory elections, where post-election litigation will not lead to a major determination of who will govern one state or the other. Overall, we're expectant, we're enthusiastic, citizens are passionate, we hope to see a successful election.
As they say in Nigeria, we'll wait and see. But thank you for that opening analysis, Prof. Let me come to you, Dr. Ikokwu. In a sense, as Prof was saying there, and as Iliad Hassan hinted previously, all eyes will be on this election, not just for the results, but also for the process and for issues like violence.
Yes, of course, that's true, especially because at the state level, like she mentioned, elections are fiercely fought. One of the reasons why we see that is that the governors in the states are, very powerful. And most times they want to control not only their governorship seat, but the state assembly as well. This is something that a lot of people do not pay close attention to. It's like a fiefdom. So most of the state assemblies end up being like a rubber stamp for the governor and do his bidding. So that state assembly is very important to him. Although at that level, they're very close to the people and critical to the well-being and health of the state. But what we have seen in the past is that it's a place where the governors exhibit, dictatorial tendencies and do not want to have a space of dynamic, progressive engagement and a cacophony of voices and ideas that are brilliant in order to move the state forward. So what we're going to see in this election is going to be a lot of jostle between different candidates and different parties, and of course because also in the presidential election a lot of things have changed, depending on who won what. So people are going to trying to make sure that they get the vote this time around. Speaking on election violence, I mean, it's already happening in Lagos State. We must have seen people in Lagos, one or two people that have sort of been ethnically profiling people, making very inflammatory remarks that boils down to really ethnic profiling that shouldn't be happening. I think the Commissioner of Police in Lagos State was asked about that earlier today, and he said he is investigating. And the question is, investigating what? The man is walking around there. You can pick him up and literally, caution him or call him out. Because people are being asked to stay home if they do not intend to vote for a particular political party. That's absolutely catastrophic for a nation that is trying to build and consolidate on democracy.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And I have to say that I also saw that interview this afternoon. It was actually on Arise News with the Commissioner of Police in Lagos. And I wondered exactly the same thing that you were wondering. Why is the man walking around, and what's this investigation all about? I mean, why don't you bring him in, take him out of the equation, and ask him the questions that you need to ask him? But that brings me to you, David Otto, because you are an international security analyst with a lot of experience in Nigeria and across Africa. What's your assessment of the security situation in this country going into those elections tomorrow, Saturday?
I think, the best way to put it, Charles, is that, there is a lot of responsibility now. The elections are tomorrow. What you would expect at this point in time is that, the security agencies would have already done, what we call force deployment. And normally when you deploy your forces to the various local government areas, or perhaps, to the various polls, then that would be based on your national security intelligence, in terms of the hotspots, within the election. So how much, a force you deploy to a particular unit or to a particular state, will be determined by that intelligence. The police had perhaps about 64 billion to deal with the election security. I'm sure that they also benefit from INEC's own security budget, and the IGP, the Inspector General of Police, has made it very clear that he has enough resources, he has enough men on ground. That is what he says. But the critical thing to note, Charles, is that this will be a very big test to the national security based on the previous performance that we had on the 25th elections. And a lot of people were very disappointed that the police force and other security agencies did not do as much as they expected to do. So this election, because it deals now with the grassroots. You know, the governorship and the state assembly elections in Nigeria are very critical, of course, because, you know, of the federal system of governance. Perhaps, you know, the presidential election is mostly talked about globally, but what makes any presidential seat powerful, you know, would depend on how much, you know, power they have within the 28 or the 36 states, you know, depending on which numbers you're looking at now. So critically, I think, you know, the state security agencies will be very, very mindful of the very high tensed environment, because a lot of people are trying to use this, you know, gubernatorial election and the state assembly election, you know, to make some kind of, you know, final determination as to, you know, what really went wrong, you know, and if there has been any lessons that have been learned so far by either INEC or the state security forces. So a lot of eyes are not just on the security agencies, but mostly also on INEC itself. So the international community, I have to mention, will be paying very, very close attention to see how the behavior of the INEC officials, how INEC conducts itself, you know, during this period of time, and that itself would determine how people behave. Because of course, you know, violence, you know, is an outcome of causation factors, and some of those factors, if they are election related, then what you would see if it leads to malpractices or people snatching boxes or votes or causing, you know, outright fraud, then of course, you know, we would experience, you know, some kind of a stress test, you know, to the security agencies. But for now, you know, the test, you know, will be determined by the outcome tomorrow.
Okay, David, thank you very much indeed for that. And let me just point out that that insouciant racket that you can hear in the background as David was talking was the fact that music was filtering in from outside. Where we are, there's a big event taking place outside. It's not us having a rave in here. It's music filtering in from outside. But as you can see, David, as composed as ever, not a hair out of place, or perhaps I should say no hair at all. But let me come to you, Prof, and just on the back of what David was talking about in terms of security and violence. I mean, the authorities really need to very quickly and decisively step in to make sure that any contagion of violence doesn't spread, and also to reassure voters.
Yeah, very well. I think we expect them to be speak and span tomorrow, considering the fact that beyond INEC, the umpire responsible for conducting the election, the other stakeholder that is most critical is actually security, because if security is not present, you know, at the polling booth, I'm afraid, you know, election cannot hold. You know, they play very critical roles, and of course the police has been severally identified as a lead agency, and like I said earlier, they have opportunity this time around, you know, to up their ante, to do better than they did with the presidential election, considering the fact that they are now stretched across the entire length and breadth of the country. They only have 28 states to deal with. And of course, they can also concentrate on the flashpoints. You know, there are some states that are very, very critical in this circumstance. Rivers comes to mind, Lagos comes to mind as well, Sokoto, Kano, and maybe Kaduna to some extent. All these flashpoints can attract their attention some more with regards to how they get information as quickly as possible, how they process this into intelligence, and how they're moving, you know, to deal with potential crime. And these things are actually predictable. We know the pattern of crime, you know, with election, ballot box snatching, voter suppression, intimidation, threats of direct attack, assaults on individuals, and there are signs already. What needs to be done now? Nothing else other than full deployment. You know, if before you have, for example, 10,000 men, if you have to increase it to 15,000 men, just to make sure that peace reigns in those flashpoints, yeah, it's actually the noble thing to do in this circumstance. But again, we'll keep hope alive that they will be up to the mark and they will do better than they did last time. Because, yeah, we may say that the international community is not focusing, will not focus on this as much as they did the presidential election, but it's also another opportunity for us to increase our credibility with respect to, you know, the integrity of the election, you know,
Absolutely.
with respect to transparency. Subnational levels are very, very critical. They are no less important than the presidential election, because we have a president elected, and of course the governors are people who emerge through violence. It has a way of rubbing off eventually. So we want all, you know, to be above average largely. If in the last presidential election we are rating it 50% over 100, in this one we should be able to rate it 60 or above. And at the end of the day, we can do some balancing, some adjustments, and probably feel some sense of satisfaction moving forward against the background of the determination, you know, a determination to consolidate or deepen our democracy, as the case could be, Charles.
Yes, that's a good point, Prof. And Dr. Ikokwu, of course, people died in several places during the presidential election, but we don't see the government, we don't see the president rising up to really stridently and unequivocally condemn it, and the police carrying out swift prosecutions. You touched on that briefly earlier, because that really is what restores confidence. I mean, how many dead people during an election does it take for the authorities to be kick-started into action?
Unfortunately, death has become very common in Nigeria. We have been facing all sorts of security challenges, whether it's Boko Haram, whether it's non-state actors fighting against the government. There's been all sorts for so many years. So it's like something happens and people are shocked, and then they come back and they move on. So it happened in the presidential election. I think this time around, people are not expecting much, because the actions of the security forces does not engender confidence. It doesn't engender trust in the government. So, you know, the general view is that we just have to go out there and do what we need to do to see if we can take back our country. So it's very unfortunate, and I think it's something that everybody discusses that we need to focus on in Nigeria. If the state is very weak, as we see, security-wise and otherwise, you get this kind of challenges. The challenges are not coming only because of politics. It's also because there are several other factors. For instance, when there's high rates of poverty, when there's high rate of unemployment, you know, it's very easy to recruit people to do these kind of things. So when you're trying to tackle this kind of problem, it shouldn't focus on purely on election. The other thing to note also is that politicians are really, really desperate. Prof mentioned a couple of states where we have seen every election cycle, it's like a do or die affair. Whether it's Rivers State, whether it's Lagos State. In Kaduna, for instance, there is a huge divide politically, religious, and ethnically in that state. And some would say that the last governor, or the outgoing governor, hasn't done a great job of trying to bring people together and you know, to make peace and have a state that is vibrant and people feel like they are accommodated in their own state. So in that particular state, Kaduna, I think that you might see, you know, really flashpoints of violence, you know, because you know, parties want to gain the power. So for instance, the PDP and the APC will be the ones that are jostling to take that state. The current governor is trying to install his former aide as his successor. You know, so they do have some powers in the states, but we'll watch and see what goes on. And, you know, in other states, this is happening. I mean, we talk about this every election cycle. I think it's time that the government really does something serious about it.
Well, that's a very good point. And let's go from Kaduna, that you were talking about, Constance, to Lagos, David, Otto. I'm sure you might have heard there's been a lot of controversy, I mean, around issues of, you know, ethnic clashes and all the rest of them. And also controversy around this thing called the Oro Festival, which has the potential to disrupt the elections. I mean, I wonder, you're the sort of the security expert. How do these events take place? Don't they have to inform the police that it's taking place? Because I'm wondering why the police would grant permission to such a disruptive event during the elections, or have the two events clashed? Because obviously the elections were postponed from March the 11th to March the 18th, and it was originally scheduled a week earlier. So I'm wondering if that is why that there's been a clash. Although, to be fair, the police have said that it's not actually going to clash, that the hours that are allowed for the festival to take place are late at night, whereas the elections take place during the day.
Yes, Charles, you're absolutely right. Elections are very, challenging, especially in the case of Lagos, as you know. And what you don't want, in addition, is for these kind of cultural clashes. As a result of a clash of time. And as you said, this festival, was taking place at a time when, of course, it was planned to take place after the elections, but because of the postponement, it is now happening. And that difficult challenge of either cancelling it could set more problems to the Lagos CP or this Lagos Command. So I think, what is quite important here to know is that I believe that if all is done, if there is communication and dialogue with the organizers, then I think it's quite easy for the elections to still go on smoothly. I think the police have enough to worry on their plate, when it comes to Lagos, because Lagos is a very critical state. It's a very hot point, or one of the hottest points, if I may say, when it comes to this particular election. So I think what the police should be focusing on now is how to carry out their force deployment, make sure that they are doing the right thing, because of course, Charles, governors have a very powerful hold, perhaps even on the police command. And where the police is kind of brought into play or dance to the music of whoever is in charge of a particular state, then it becomes a very challenging effort for any opposition party or any other individual. So I think what the police should be focusing on now critically, as we have these elections coming up tomorrow, is to ensure that its forces are doing what they are supposed to do, that they are manning these election polling units, that they ensure that the rapid intervention units that are responsible for responding to incidents, do their job as they are supposed to do. These incidents, these activities, these cultural activities should be left, to go on. I think people, can still continue to vote while these activities go on. But the police must be able to do their job because, of course, they've done their homework as it may.
David, thank you very much indeed. And Prof, we've got just about 3 minutes or so left on the program. So if you could be reasonably brief. Overall, do you think this election season has taken Nigeria's democracy forward, bearing in mind that we've just seen the presidential election and we're yet to see the governorship election tomorrow?
Well, Charles, we've made this point severally, and I think it bears repeating that in terms of longevity, we have not done badly in our democracy, considering that we are now in the 24th year at it, yeah. And 24 years after, uninterrupted, we're growing slowly. Yes, we could have done faster, yeah. But the way questions can still be asked is in terms of character and quality, the content of the democratic experiment itself. And the content will be measured by the extent to which officials have been able to deliver the proverbial dividends of democracy, and of course, how these officials emerge in the first instance. There's still increasing allegations of rigging, absence of transparency, lack of accountability. All these are still the downsides, which I think we can still continue to improve upon. But like Mr. Igini said the other day, the solution to deficiencies in democracy is more democracy, not interrupting democracy.
Right. Prof, thank you very much indeed. And a final word from you, Constance, Dr. Ikokwu. Do you think this election season has taken Nigeria's democracy forward?
To a degree it has, because when you look at the BVAS that was used, it sort of cleaned out the register. Before, in a polling unit, for instance, where they had fictitious names and maybe 1,000 people, you find out that with the BVAS it's only maybe 500 people. So that is very good. On the other side, there are still glitches, so I think we have to work on the human errors. If we have technology, you want to sort of hire people that are, smart and, and savvy, tech savvy, and are committed to work for the good of all and not to sabotage the process. So a few steps forward, a few steps backward, but we are on the move.
Okay, and just very, very briefly, David, a final word from you. We've got 30 seconds.
I think the key thing is that Nigerians should be able to go out tomorrow and make their choice. The security agencies must also ensure that democracy is restored. And perhaps, for me, I think this is an opportunity for INEC to ensure that it provides an election that is worth what it's on the paper. And what we want to see is integrity and let's move forward from there. But, the taste of the pudding will be in the eating tomorrow, Charles.
Absolutely. And on that note, I want to thank you all very much indeed. David Otto, who is the International Security Analyst and African Representative for the Anti-Terrorism Accreditation Board, Professor of Communications, Deputy Dean of the Postgraduate School at Bayes University in Abuja, Professor Abiodun Adeniyi, and of course the journalist, political affairs commentator, and Arise News analyst, Dr. Constance Ikokwu. Thank you very much indeed.